Welcome everybody to the Street Support Action Group conference, Beyond Bricks and Mortar, we've entitled this one. I'm really pleased to welcome so many people. I think we've got record sign up and hopefully a few more will join us as we go along. We're going to start with a little video that the students from Southampton University have produced for us, and we're really pleased to have some of them on the call as well today. I know we've got our politicians registered, so our new portfolio lead, Spiros, is very welcome. I know he was at our very first Beds, Begging and Business event. I remember having a chat with him, so I hope he's on the call with us now, and delighted to have him with us. We've got our MPs from both parties, Itchin and Test, with us, or at least registered to be with us, and lots of colleagues from across all different agencies. So really pleased to see everybody here. This event is, I think, our 7th in a series that started back in 2018 when we ran an event called Beds, Begging and Business. And it was a 2-day event in January where we got together to talk about the issues around street homelessness and begging. And it was very much a listening and conversation event, trying to explore the complexities of those issues. And from that, we've progressed work across all of the organisations in Southampton really positively. That event went on to create a charter, which we launched in September of 2018. And that was about organisations committing to having the aim that Southampton be a city where no one needs to sleep rough or beg. And that's an aim that we hold close to our heart moving forward. It gave an opportunity for organisations and individuals to make pledges to how they personally and organisationally would contribute to that cause. And you can continue to do that via the Street Support website. The interagency group that was set up from those events is now called the Street Support Action Group, and we collectively meet together, and it's been a really kind of powerful group to carry forward the agenda that we first discussed back in 2018, and has led us to be in a really good position to be able to support homeless people, particularly during this difficult past year. And I think it's a testament to the joint working and collaborative working across the city that actually we were able to respond really quickly to ensure that people who were homeless were not any worse position in respect of COVID than any of the rest of the population. Obviously, it's been a very tough year and a very challenging and worrying year for everyone, but we've all done our best and worked hard to ensure that homeless people are as supported as anyone else in our community. But as we know, homelessness isn't just about finding places for people to stay. And so we're really pleased to have Nick with us as our keynote speaker. But before we move to Nick, I'm going to ask Paul, I'm going to do my Chris Whitty bit now and say, next slide, please, Paul. And hopefully we're going to get the short video come up. And thank you to all the students at Solent University. So I didn't introduce myself, but probably many of you know me already. I'm Jo Ash. I'm Chief Executive of Southampton Voluntary Services, well, at least until July when I retire. But I'm delighted to be asked to chair today's event. And I'm even more delighted to welcome Nick Maguire as our keynote speaker today, because Nick has been really influential in the world of homelessness and working with people who have addictions and substance misuse and trying to move people's lives forward in positive ways. So delighted to have Nick talking about some of the wider aspects of supporting people around homelessness. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Jo. Very much appreciated. And I really appreciate the invitation to talk about some of the stuff that started back in Southampton in Derby Road back in 2003, when MHCLG was called ODPM and Louise Casey was a star, and Louise Casey still is a star. Many things have changed since then. I want to talk a little bit about how the work that started in Southampton and still goes on in Southampton has kind of evolved our thinking about homelessness. Is it possible to, can I move on? Oh, cheers, thanks. So one of the things we started to think about was as a clinical psychologist, I'm really interested in bringing a psychological understanding to a very, very complex issue. At the time, one of the things that struck me was that there seemed to be kind of two arguments about homelessness. One, that it was a housing problem, and another, that it was a mental health and individual problem. And I think through the work that we started to do and the conversations we had and the things I was taught, not just by the people working and serving people who are homeless, but mainly by the people who are homeless themselves, of course, it's this dynamic interrelationship. It's an interaction. It's not housing and it's not the individual. It's the interaction of the two. And it's the place where people are and the place where we serve people, as well as the kind of the mental health issues and the complex trauma issues that people have faced. So one of the things I think that we started to do was to try and bring the issue of complex trauma to the fore, and how that then influenced the way in which people try to cope with the world, given impoverished early experiences, attachment problems, and all those kind of things. And we spent a long time kind of researching those things with an explicit relationship with the University of Southampton. So in 2012, we then started writing about this idea of psychologically informed environments, trying to capture the idea that where people are and the environment within which we find people was as important as some of the other issues like the mental health issues, housing, etc. And it's interesting because I think when we started writing, I was thinking about hostels at the time and day centres and places where people who were homeless are used. But actually, I think we broadened our understanding out now to think about the environment as in terms of the organisational environment. So how an organisation configures itself, how the NHS configures itself, which means that it's in some senses, part of the problem. So NHS mental health services struggle to serve our people partly through the way in which the NHS has to be structured in order to serve a whole population. And when you're trying to serve a whole population, you start to kind of think about efficiency in a particular way. And efficiency starts to look like how many people you can see in a day, rather than perhaps what changes as a result of seeing those people. And so through that, I was able to set up a social enterprise. And the idea is that we're explicitly serving people who are homeless, who are street homeless, or perhaps living in hostels and bouncing in and out of the two, and serving the psychological needs of those people. So we're learning about psychological needs as well as serving them through interventions. But it's really interesting when you start to get into conversations. We start to think about sort of mental health issues, but we also think about housing and how housing is provided in, the simple things like where that housing is provided and how that might promote loneliness, and that's going to have an impact on the survival of a tenancy or not. But also things like service configuration. So the way in which mental health services configure themselves, but also the way how all of our organisations configure themselves, how risk policies are written, and how they're interpreted, and how they're interpreted on the ground, and how we deliver warnings. All of these kind of things affect whether somebody is likely to be evicted or not, or whether somebody is likely to abandon a tenancy or not. And that's independent of the person's issues where they may have suffered neglect and abuse in childhood, and they may struggle to regulate emotions and struggle to regulate impulses, and then the way we kind of would think about that is that the things like drug and alcohol start to become coping issues. So what's the best way of me to try and calm myself down if I've never been taught these skills? Well, it's to ingest something. And so when we start to think psychologically, we start to see things like drug and alcohol as as a person finding a solution for an internal problem, and that problem has been an issue for their lives. So we can start to see that, the causes and maintenance factors are at all levels. So what causes homelessness? Well, poverty, child poverty particularly. And so a lot of work coming out of Harriet Watts with Suzanne Fitzpatrick and Graham Bramble and those kind of things illustrate and find the kind of the correlation between things like homelessness and child poverty. But then you could ask a medic or a psychologist, well, what causes homelessness? Well, a biological predisposition to becoming wound up very quickly. And it's everything in between. So everything in between the macro and the micro. And this is why it's a complex issue. And this is why simple solutions never, ever work. There's a guy called H.L. Mencken, who was a 1920s, 1950s journalist, and full of bon mots. And one of them is that for every complex issue, there's an elegant, simple solution that's wrong. And unfortunately, sort of some of the commissioning environments within which we are kind of promote simple solutions. What's the next panacea? What's the next answer to homelessness? Of course, there isn't one answer to homelessness. And unfortunately, there's a danger of getting into simple solutions, particularly when we have things like short-term commissioning processes where we need to deliver on a fairly short timescale. That tends to provide simple solutions rather than engaging with the complex, everything between the way we configure our economy and genetic predisposition. Let's move on, please. So if there's one slide that kind of defines our current approach, it's this one. Lovely, simple one. Basically, if you're a psychologist, you need a concentric circles model. And this is our concentric circles model. The individual, of course, has to be in the center. And around which we tend to configure organizations, whether they be voluntary sector organizations, social care organizations, healthcare organizations, Public Health England, commissioning processes. And around that individual, we kind of can configure proximal services. So in Southampton, we've got some great charities who do some amazing work. And the way in which they kind of work has been learned over years and years and evolved over years and years, effectively to effectively serve the individual. But they sit within a wider kind of environment where we've got the way in which the UK configures its culture, but also its policy and how policy varies and how health policy varies, as well as economic policy. And all these kind of things will affect commissioning processes, which then affect the way in which organizations need to respond, which will affect the individuals. So we can start to see this really important, and it doesn't just go that way, this important kind of set of relationships. The way the individuals behave will affect the way that we behave and the way the organizations respond, which will affect the way that, to some extent, if we possibly can, the way in which the services are configured and commissioned and policy. So this is one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to use data provided by the individuals to help organizations adapt themselves to the way in which the wider organization and policy environment is working. And we do that through a number of methods. Possible to move on, please? So if there's one take-home message for us, I think it's the idea that collaboration is absolutely key. It's really, really important. One of the things I think that we've learned through the research that we've done, where we found that in Everybody In, people really valued, particularly the relationship between a number of outreach workers, particularly the HFAST team run by two saints, and the homeless healthcare team, the healthcare professionals. And it made so much sense to have the two working together and to have medicine provided on the street where people are. And you need the kind of biographical information about people and the relationships with people in order to be able to start to do that. And that's provided by people who are out every day getting to know those people. And it's not just the outreach workers with an HFAS, but outreach workers all over, from the city council and all over. We got some great relationships. We're inspired by and providing work for the US Street Medicine Institute. And they, of course, they have no universal healthcare system, so they have to, or most of their work is provided on the street, and it's provided voluntarily or through gifting or through sometimes provider and hospital commissioning. But they're very good at street medicine. They really get it. They really get how to provide healthcare and social care on the streets, because they have to do that. This is something that we are learning from them, and we're doing better, and it's enabled through collaboration. So this kind of whole community approach becomes really important. So we start to think about the voluntary sector working hand in hand with the health sector, but also business and the police. We all have, all people have are stakeholders within the kind of the easing and the reduction in homelessness. And what we start to notice, of course, is when we have really good, really useful meetings, maybe about individuals, maybe about the way in which services are configured, and we have input from people who really understand and know from a particular perspective, that's where we start to get amazing work happening. So when the police are involved with the outreach teams and the health teams and the social care teams, then the kind of the magic starts to happen, and then we start being able to really work with the complex needs that people have. I like to frame the universities, the two universities, as civic universities. They have a civic role. I'm fairly clear that I use the university in order to serve people who are homeless. It's and what they provide, of course, is a way, a place of formally and scientifically reflecting on what's effective, and then why is it effective. So we evaluate, we provide services through social enterprise, and then we can evaluate those services that we provide. And it's not just are they effective or not, but why might they be effective? What is it that we're doing that is effective? And perhaps what is it we're doing that isn't effective, that maybe we can leave. So there's this continually iterative process, and it's an evolutionary process. We need to be evolving over time, making use of the data which we gather, which we provide on the streets, and we give to the universities to analyze. So the university is, both universities are also community stakeholders, and as much as any of the rest of the community that we describe. And I guess lastly, what it leads to is an argument around complexity. If you're going to properly address complexity, and you're not going to try and overly simplify, then you need a community approach, and collaboration across the community is massively important. I'm hoping we'll hear a little bit about some of the case studies that we have in Southampton, where community and where collaboration has been key in enabling people to start to make changes to enable them to sustain housing and tenancies, making all of the improvements in health and social care that they deserve. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Nick. Absolutely spot on to time, which is brilliant. Thank you. Makes my job a little easier. And a really thoughtful kind of exposition, really, of the complexity of the issues that we're dealing with. And I hope that the collaborative approach that we've adopted since the initiative back in 2018 is indicative of us trying to work in that community whole collaboration approach to dealing with these matters. So thank you very much indeed for setting the scene for us. I should have said, colleagues, if you could put any questions that you might have in the chat box. We won't be able to take contributions and questions from the audience today because time is really tight on the agenda. But what we will do is try and take and answer any questions. If they're quick ones, somebody might be able to put an answer straight away in the chat for you. But if not, we will take those questions away and we will put responses as we can gather the information about them on the website for your information. So I'm going to move on now to invite Liz Slater from the City Council to give us a bit of an overview really on the issues and the homelessness pathways and how things have been going in the last few months. So over to Liz.
Hello everyone, glad that so many of you could join us. It's really good. Unfortunately I can't see you, which is a shame, but nonetheless. So I'm Liz Slater, I'm the Manager for Housing Needs and Welfare Support. It wouldn't fit in the slide, so I just put part of the title there. So I've been here a few times before and was at the first conference that we had for Beds and Business Conference, so been on the journey with everyone else. I thought it was worth probably just doing a pre-COVID recap, just to put some context of where we got to before we were hit by the pandemic. I won't spend too long, and Paul's going to help me through the slides because I feel like I'm driving but without control of the steering wheel, so I'm in his hands at the moment. So just very quickly, we've been fortunate enough to get a source of fund called the Rough Sleeper Initiative funding from government since 2018. And actually, when I was looking at my notes, I realised we'd had funds before that, which was the origin of the HVAS team that Nick came through Rough Sleeper grant fund through government. So we've had a long history now of obtaining funds and really trying to do some extra work to tackle the issues that some of our rough sleepers face. So just before we went into the COVID pandemic period, we just received our Year 3 funding, which gave us some extra outreach capacity, which came in very handy, I have to say. So we were very lucky to have had that. It paid for the homeless navigators, which is what we now term the HVAS team, to keep up to speed with government initiatives and the way that they tend to like to label these things. We'd agreed that we wanted to fund some additional specialist health sessions, which again came in very handy, I have to say, given the pandemic. And we had some extra provisions, what we called low threshold beds. So these were within the hostel provisions, but there were no strings attached to these beds. These were just accessible at short notice with no rules attached to those. And they were again used to good effect. We also had something called a Somewhere Safe to Stay hub, which was based at the Booth Centre, and this is for people who were really very new to rough sleeping, who we felt couldn't manage some of the other settings. So this was an opportunity for them to have somewhere safe to stay, and the intention was that they wouldn't stay there very long, they'd move on quite quickly. And that evolved over the time, it's changed quite a bit since then. It also includes some supported lettings where this was providing support in accommodation, but more self-contained in private rented. It also gave us an opportunity to have a project coordinator. So Simone's going to speak later, she's in that role at the moment, but we've had that post for a little while now, which actually I think is a key to the collaboration we've been able to achieve. It's been very helpful. And we managed to fund a part-time volunteer coordinator, which also was extremely valuable, which I'll come on to in a minute. And the NRFPF there is no recourse to public funds. So we've had difficulties in Southampton with some of our rough sleepers who unfortunately can't access housing as a public fund, nor can they access benefits. And they really struggle to find alternatives. So we had a support worker there to try and work with them at looking at what their options may be, and how we could deliver a better level of support for them. Moving into March last year, we actually had, prior to that, we'd had some cold weather funding, and the provision then had been in operation from the November 19, and we agreed that we would keep it throughout the period. We wouldn't rely on the weather changing, we'd keep it throughout that time so we could really accommodate, in an emergency accommodation sense, some of our sleepers throughout the winter. And we kept that running, complemented by the church winter provision at that time. So we'd set ourselves quite a useful foundation for going into the pandemic, and we kept that running a little bit longer. So just really wanted to recap on what we had running at that time, and just to say that all those initiatives that have been operating were really starting to impact. So when we do our annual street count, which we're required to do, which is only a very small snapshot impression of what's happening across the country, but it does give us a marker, a litmus test, if you will. We were beginning to see some improvements in that. So in 2019, so this is November 19, our numbers have come down to 15 from 29 the previous year. So it's really starting to impact and making positive contribution. So that's where we were. And then we hit COVID. So what this slide does, it's actually from a government website where they track all the rough sleeper annual counts. And you'll see in 2020 on that slide, so the last bar on there, we've seen a significant reduction. This is for England as a whole. And the numbers of people found sleeping rough on that particular night in November reduced 37%. Now that is a significant improvement. Because since 2010, we really had seen a noticeable increase across the whole country of the rough sleeper issue had really started to ramp up. So that's a massive improvement. And I have to say that unfortunately, our numbers in 2020 slightly increased. So we bucked the trend there, but only by 3 people. So it wasn't a massive increase that year, but it did increase a little. And I want to really explain why over the country that we saw a noticeable reduction. So if we go to the next slide. So COVID really did impact, and this is the changing picture in terms of our response to COVID. So in March 2020, I was just relaying that I remember the day really, which was the 27th of March, only because it's my mum's birthday. But we got an email from Government Office basically saying, went out to all local authorities saying, get everyone in off the street. No holds barred, do whatever you can to get everyone off the street into emergency accommodation. So that was quite a tough requirement. That was quite a lot to ask of us. We had positioned ourselves quite well leading up to that, luckily. And we'd kept our bed and breakfast provision through the winter months open. And the week before, we'd taken the decision that we would keep those beds open and we would utilise those because the pandemic was already at that stage beginning to impact. Another reason for wanting to do that was the government also issued instruction that there should be no shared sleeping arrangements. So luckily in Southampton, most of our hostel provision is not shared sleeping. It's people in their own rooms with their own door, and that didn't cause us too much difficulty. What it did do, unfortunately, meant we had to close some of our low threshold beds and also made our winter shelters at that time redundant, which we'll come on and say a little bit more about later. So we were well positioned, but it was still a big ask. And we expanded that bed and breakfast locally. Nick's just mentioned the need to collaborate on that. We were in the very early stages at this stage, but even at that early stage, it was important that we engaged with our local police officers. We were talking about lockdown here. We were talking about not really understanding what the environment was, and also having people going into neighbourhoods sitting in bed and breakfast and the associated, concern around that. The police were very helpful. They helped us manage those, the community around that, and also they, express the need to respect lockdown arrangements. They were really helpful in that regard. The low threshold beds, and some are safe to say, as I say, that had to adapt very quickly. We had to move that into communal spaces within the hostels, but the hostel providers did that and kept those spaces available to us. They just configured it slightly differently. So that was our response. I put right at the bottom, I won't go on about this because I know Paul's got it in his presentation later, but we had this difficulty that we couldn't, in the winter of 2020, we couldn't rely on our previous arrangements for cold weather, but we did have a fantastic response from the churches in relation to providing some extra provision at that time in place of our severe weather provision. So that's where, next slide please, Paul. Okay, I want to say a bit more, and I didn't know that Nick was going to focus so much in terms of collaboration, but it does resonate significantly with what I wanted to say really, and that is the work that was done was all down to people pulling together, understanding what was needed, finding solutions, looking at the scenario in the city and working really positively together to find a way of dealing with it. I cannot emphasize how that was the way in which we managed to succeed on this basis. So Nick's just mentioned that the street outreach provision. So this is people going out on the street. We combined our resources with the navigators and the homelessness healthcare team. And there was daily contact happening, trying to find people, engaging with them, trying to understand what they need, and making direct referrals into that bed and breakfast. So that support, that access to health, that access to engagement didn't stop on the street. It continued in that bed and breakfast so that we could manage behaviour if it started to become problematic. We could continue to understand what their needs were and plan for what their next move would be, what support they needed. It was through that route we managed to pick up quite a number of people and get them registered with GP surgeries. It was a really effective way of getting all sorts of things provided for at that point. A lot of support went in. And just wanted to say something about the bed and breakfast. These are commercial operations that really did go the extra mile. They really did help, and they really did try to work with us to make sure they understood the client group. And I have to say, they took on some of the extra sleepers to help manage it. So there was a real benefit from using those particular providers. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think they really did rise to the challenge at that time. They really worked with us, so that's a big success. I just quickly want to mention the food scenario. So we were dealing with our own rough sleepers, but there was at one point early in the pandemic, lots of other local authorities were struggling with the same thing. And because Southampton had hotels that were open where others had closed, so some of the chain hotels closed in other parts of the county, but they stayed open in Southampton, they started to place people in there. And if it wasn't for the response of our voluntary sector and faith groups, those people would not have found food, I have to say. So they were literally delivering food to those establishments to help feed people from outside the city in those. So I can't thank them enough, and it was a real opportunity that they took. So I'm really grateful to them. Well, we did charge them in the end, didn't we, Paul? But that's another thing. Anyway, so the other thing I really wanted to just point out to everyone, when we were in lockdown and when we didn't necessarily know what risks there were to viral spread, we didn't know what PPE was going to be available. We didn't know whether or not this cohort of people were going to be vulnerable to the disease. There was a lot of uncertainty, but the hostel providers, the housing support providers, were there 24/7 throughout. They managed to keep going. They ran with whatever we threw at them and whatever was thrown more widely at them. And I have to really thank them for that, because I think we lose sight very easily. It's not always a visible service that many people see, but 24/7 services providing that, these vulnerable individuals in these circumstances, really does need to be recognised. And the final thing I really wanted to say on this was about collaboration. Was we operated on the basis of a daily panel to begin with, so that every provider, the outreach team, the health providers were coming and talking about the needs of those individuals, and we used whatever resources and whatever vacancies we had to best effect, so that they didn't languish in the wrong place indefinitely, so that we could get that move through and we could get the right solutions for individuals. And that was a real exercise in collaboration, and I think we've learned a lot from it, and I think that we'll take some of that learning into the future when we start to look at our services and any changes we need to make. So that was a really successful way of delivering. Okay, clearly the health needs of homeless people, I think the original video by their colleagues here, my students picked that up. It mentions the health issues that are experienced for homeless people. That's definitely the case. And whilst that's true that they suffer more from health or ill health, it's also true this gave us an opportunity to access health in a way they've previously not had. And I think that's, again, a bit of a learning, and it sort of complements what Nick was saying earlier. So the homelessness healthcare team were out as part of that outreach, providing some of our workforce with assurances about COVID symptoms checking, to make sure that where we were concerned about individuals, they were there to help us diagnose that. They made sure that we did those health assessments, not just on the street, but when they moved into that emergency accommodation, so that we got a plan for moving forward with those health difficulties. The other feature that I don't think has been previously in this arena has been the role of public health. Now, obviously, COVID's been about public health, but their practical support and advice has been very prominent over this whole period. So a lot of what we did was with their oversight, and we were able to take advice from it about how to contain outbreaks, what to do in relation to how to isolate, how to provide PPE, and then moving on from that, the vaccination rollout, and where they needed to target that. Simone's going to cover that in a bit more detail, but all of those things are just ways in which we managed to link up with our colleagues in public health and really get some hands-on practical support for this. And finally, in relation to health needs, I just wanted to mention the provision around dentistry. So there's a local charity, Dentaid, that I think as we profiled at a previous conference, and actually as a result of that profile, the local authority, the council, actually managed to find some extra funds to extend this offer, so that the mobile treatment facility has been going into our hostels. Now, I wrote this slide here before I got some more information. It's probably just worth me referring to my notes now. So they've actually done 20 extra clinics of free dentistry for our homeless population. And they've managed to do it at Jordan House, Patrick House, and they've seen in total 46 patients, but given 196 treatments, including 16 extractions, which I don't really like to say out loud, but you know, some really hardcore dentistry that's happened there. And some of the feedback that the hostels have got has been incredibly positive. It's been really welcomed. It's made them more confident with approaching their need for dentistry, and they've really seen some incredible results. And I just think it's really shown the value of this and accessing provision for health that they've previously just not had. So this is continuing, but I just wanted to focus on that just for a minute, because it came out of these conferences that those links have been made, and we're really seeing the benefit. Do you want to move on? Thank you. Okay. Bit dry, but nonetheless worth saying. Throughout the pandemic, we've had weekly contact with specialist advisors from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And whilst that's been quite onerous at times, it's actually been their way of understanding what's happening at a local level. And it really has fed into some of the funds that have been available through government. So as you can imagine, paying for emergency accommodation since beginning of 2020 throughout, and we're still using it now, has not been without some cost. So we've been working with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, what a mouthful, to try and to get them to understand and to take advantage of what resources are out there. So I just thought that was worth mentioning. I have to say it's been generous but onerous, because it's been a lot of hard work to submit our information, which has been, the data collection has changed quite frequently, has been quite onerous. The request for grant submissions has been quite onerous, and then follow-up monitoring that comes from that, but it's been very beneficial. So I just wanted to say that. So I've talked about year 3 RSI funds at the beginning of this. In July, we had some funds which is called Next Steps, which for us was about £169,000 worth, which helped pay for a significant amount of the bed and breakfast funds at that time. We then had some cold weather payments that we received without applying, but we got that, I think it was 25k. And then shortly after, they introduced a program called Protect Plus, which was in November, and we got nominally given 120,000, and we had to put a plan to match that fund. And then more recently, we've had year 4 RSI funds. Now that was quite difficult. I don't know if we got commissioners on the line, but they lost quite a lot of hair and went grey with this, because I think it was Nick that said short-term commissioning comes with difficulties from the point of view of long-term gain for people who've got complex, complicated needs. It also proves quite difficult for services that are only getting year-on-year funding, and it was even more difficult this year because we were given just a quarter's funding initially for year 4, so from beginning of April to the end of June, and then we only less than 10 days ago found out that we've got the rest of the year's money. So we really had to be very agile and respond very quickly to a very changeable situation. So the good news about all that is we have now got year 4. It is a significant sum of money, and there's a lot of good stuff that should be able to continue and new things delivered as a result of it. I haven't put the detail up on that. It's another 10 minutes presentation to do so. So I've kept that short, so I won't. But next slide, and I think I'm nearly done. Okay, I just wanted to summarise what this has done in terms of volume. So I thought this slide, which presented me somewhere else, was a useful way of describing it. So during the period March 20 to the end of April 21, we helped 165 individuals into emergency accommodation. It says 173 placements. Some of those people came out and then went back in. That's the difference in numbers. And of those, we've managed to move on 145 of them. So a very significant proportion of the people we've placed into bed and breakfast have moved on into something more suitable, something more akin to what they really need. And there's a massive amount of joint work that's gone in to do that. So 58 of them have gone into supported accommodation, that's our hostels. 34 of them managed to move into their own self-contained, into private rented accommodation. And we've managed to support that through deposits, rent and advance type schemes. And we've managed to move 5 into secure accommodation through social housing vacancies, which is good. On top of all that, some people have not had to rough sleep in order to be accommodated. So whilst we've dealt with emergency accommodation, whilst we've done all that work on the street, we've also had 379 people during that period who have still been referred to us. This is hospital discharges, people coming out of being released from prison. This is people coming out of mental health provision and needing accommodation. Those people have not had to experience a rough sleeping because we've managed to accommodate them without that happening. So in the round, that is a considerable amount of work, and all that collaboration that I've tried to explain is how that's been possible. And we need to learn from that, keep that collaboration as functioning as well as it has done when we move forward. So I just wanted to promote that, and I think I'm on my last slide now. Is that right? Yeah. I wanted to end on a particular high from me, because this is a slide that the government officials used in a cross Hampshire forum recently, and I just updated it slightly. And all it shows, I don't normally like for us to, I'm not blowing my own trumpet, I'm blowing everybody's collective trumpet here. What we've done, this tells you the number of people placed in emergency accommodation by local authority in Hampshire. So it was done in November 20, and then I've updated it for January 21. And of those that were placed, how many have moved on into more appropriate accommodation? And if you go down to Southampton, those figures I just presented, it's 547 people have moved on into some sort of more settled or supported housing over the period from over this time. And what it shows is that other people have taken in lots of people into emergency accommodation. They've not been quite successful at moving them on. And I think that, again, is a reflection of how we've managed to sustain some of our provision, our hostel accommodation provision in the city over many years, and we rely on that very heavily. So that's the last slide. I hope that's been helpful, and I'm sorry if I overran, but I can't see a clock and I haven't got a watch, so apologies for that.
I think overrunning is inevitable, but thanks very much, Liz, for a really broad whistle-stop tour through lots of the positive work that's been going on in the city. And as you say, very much facilitated by the collaboration between organisations. And you did mention the contribution that volunteers make, and next week is National Volunteers Week with a theme of saying thank you. But I think it's not inopportune to say thank you to all the volunteers and voluntary effort that's gone on over the pandemic period particularly. So that's really positive. I'm going to move swiftly on because we are pushed on time, sadly, as always runs away with us, to Simone, who I'm delighted to be welcoming. Simone replaces Claire Stagg, who was with us last time. I hope we didn't frighten Claire off by making her do a presentation. She was very nervous, but I'm sure Simone's not going to be anything like as nervous, and really pleased to have you to give us an update on the RSI projects, the Rough Sleeper Initiative projects.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Simone Gleed and I'm on a 1-year secondment to the post of RSI Project Coordinator. I've had 12 years in this sector working for the Society of St James as the Housing Services Manager, and that included managing one of the RSI projects, the High Support HMOs, otherwise known locally as supported lettings. Next slide, please. Bit of a catch up from last year. Firstly, I want to thank Claire Stagg, who held this post previously. She did an amazing amount of hard work and set me up with a great portfolio of projects to coordinate. And some of you might be aware of the Container Project. This is a joint project with the Society of St James. SSJ had identified a suitable piece of land for siting a container, and they were funding matched by the RSI funding and set about getting appropriate permissions to turn this into a home. After lots of hard work, SSJ have now obtained planning permission, worked out drainage issues and where to place the unit on the site, and have now been able to place an order for the unit itself. Unfortunately, it's got a 16-week delivery time. I think we have COVID to thank for that. But we're all hoping to see this in place and in use by the end of summer or early autumn. Liz has obviously given you an oversight, but I thought you might like to see a diversity of the projects that's currently funded through the Rough Sleeper Initiative funding, and of course the variety of providers who have taken on these projects. The remits are various, from assisting individuals to avoid entering services in the first place, rent deposits, engaging with those who are on the street, and housing and support for various presentations and needs, including avoiding homelessness for those who are currently in accommodation and need support to retain it. So I couldn't talk about the last year without mentioning COVID. The RSI projects worked frontline support throughout, housing and supporting clients through all the challenges. Without exception, every service demonstrated flexibility and dedication and an amazing response to the everyone in requirement. A huge challenge was the hidden homeless, those that were previously unknown to city services, perhaps had been sofa surfing and were no longer able to do so as people became scared. And this resulted in caseloads for the street homeless prevention team and the outreach workers more than doubling, and any space available was at a premium. As Liz mentioned, a daily housing allocation panel was created involving all the providers, the street homeless prevention team, commissioners and the RSI project coordinator. Needs assessments were carried out quickly and people were housed pretty much straight away. Challenges for services during this time included ensuring working staff remained safe, obtaining the appropriate PPE in the early days, flexing working practices to meet the demands, and of course face-to-face meetings were essential throughout. So managing to maintain support while staff teams were sometimes low in numbers due to shielding and isolation requirements was a huge challenge. Despite staff having their own personal worries for their own families, health concerns to consider, not to mention the homeschooling, and then there was the PPE that was worn all day and the ever-changing COVID restrictions, staff managed to continue providing care and support, including provision of food, which was essential to ensure adherence to any isolation requirements. They liaised with staff from other support agencies that couldn't keep a front door open during this time, and ensured that the clients' needs were met as best they could be. And obviously this included booking appointments and supporting clients for COVID testing as required. There was amazing support provided to help with anxieties brought about by the pandemic and sharing the latest government information so that clients understood that these restrictions applied to everyone and we were literally all in it together. All the RSI services and indeed all the agencies in the cities recognise the importance of working together under these extreme pressures. At various times, and obviously following the COVID regulations, staff maximised on opportunities for fun where they could, including holding barbecues in gardens, projects such as gardening, arts and crafts to make houses into homes and give people a sense of belonging. There was day trips to places like Marwell Zoo and Winchester Water Meadows. And when lockdown was at its peak, activities such as arts groups, games nights, movies, French and English lessons, afternoon teas and group walks were all held to help alleviate and curb the boredom. As staff recognised it was really important for clients to be able to socialise when they could, keep their homes as their safe places and keep morale high in such difficult times. So I have got a couple of case studies for you that hopefully demonstrate the hard work that's been done during this past year and the impact this has had. The first was a client who'd been a long-term rough sleeper. He had substance misuse issues, a mental health diagnosis, and serious, potentially life-threatening physical ailments. He hadn't previously engaged with services and he'd refused any offers of accommodation. The RSI navigators went out to him daily, providing food and clothes and building a relationship with him. They made a referral to the homeless healthcare team who visited him on the street, prescribed medication for both his mental and physical health, and took him his medication daily. He was obviously exceptionally vulnerable, and the navigators built a rapport, and eventually he agreed to come into temporary accommodation as part of the Everyone In. At that point, the mental health services became involved and he was given medication. Navigators worked with him to secure a long-term placement with mental health support, and he moved into there. And they continued to work with him for a transition period and ensured he was happy and settled before they withdrew their support. At this point, he made the comment you can see above, which you can't see above, which says, "I don't want to be homeless again." A great example of how perseverance and spending time to build those all-important trusting relationships can have remarkable results. Our second case study involves a chap who is supported by the high support HMO team or supported lettings. He had exhausted all options in terms of hostel accommodation, having lost his place there by being both physically and verbally aggressive with others he lived with, and was seen as intimidating and intolerant of others. In fact, his first placement with supported lettings also didn't work out, but a chance was taken by putting him in a smaller environment with less chaotic housemates, and actually it's gone very well for him. It became apparent that he responded well to structure around support times and locations, and agreements were made about when and where this would take place. Again, it took time to build that rapport and trust, and subjects covered were sometimes challenging for him to work through. But by meeting outside, he could stretch his legs, take his time to absorb what was being discussed, and learn skills around making choices with his actions and feelings. His engagement was superb. He only rescheduled 2 meetings in 15 months. Situational work was carried out, and he had the chance to consider what might be a healthy way to react and what result that might gain for him. Lockdown was challenging, the imposition of rules around visitors to his home, but he stuck with it, even if sometimes others didn't. And he managed his emotions well around this, talking to staff instead of taking issues into his own hands. So I'm pleased to tell you he's maintained his accommodation for well over a year now. He's attended to all outstanding health concerns. He's learnt healthy ways to deal with uncomfortable emotions and practices these skills regularly. He's reduced his substance usage, has given up smoking, and is now out of the criminal justice system for the first time in over 30 years. I'm happy to be able to talk about some other joint working which has had a really positive impact. Southampton Primary Care have run some pop-up clinics in various locations in the city, including the main hostels. And to date, we've vaccinated around 170 people. We're now rolling out the second vaccinations for this group. And in addition, Public Health England have recognised that the twice weekly lateral flow testing that's available to all adults may not be accessed by this client group. And we've been in discussions about the barriers and what might encourage uptake and ultimately keep more people safe. And finally, these next 3 slides are just to give you a little pictorial insight into what's been achieved despite it having been a hugely challenging year. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Simone. That's a really interesting description of how you've struggled through all of the challenges of COVID year and yet still kept to focus on the real stories and the real lives of the people that have been impacted. And I think we get drawn into the big issues and the big numbers, and we forget it's individuals that get hurt and individuals that are impacted so profoundly. So that's really, really good to get the 2 case studies that you gave us. Thank you. And now we're going to move swiftly on, because the clock's ticking, to Paul Leppett, who is one of the 2 Pauls that are on the Street Support Action Group. So we have to be careful which one we're talking to at any time. And Paul maintains the website, which is a really important resource in the city. So over to you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Joe mentioned at the start the first conference in January 2018, and one of the first things that we set up as a result of that conference was the website. And the reason for that is that at that conference there were a lot of people who attended it, and most of them were not aware of all the services that were already going on. And so there was this need to have this sort of central resource for information about what services are out there, what people can help. And that was why we put the emphasis on the website. And so there's now 27 organisations that are listed on our website, and they're offering 40 different services. The website was originated in Manchester. Gary and his team up there support the site, and they support our sort of local work. There's also a mobile app, and there's now 24 locations across the UK that are using the website. And so for me and others here, well, there's this networking opportunity so that we can plug into wider resources and what's going on in other cities, and there's the opportunity for cross-fertilization there. In terms of the website, Joe at the start mentioned the Southampton rough sleeping charter, and we've got a page on the Southampton pages which gives the detail of the charter, and you can go and read the information about that, and you can either pledge your support there or by emailing into us. And another part of the Southampton page is very much the local news that we want to pick up and share. So on the site, organisations can easily contact me and choose to join up and sign up to be on the site. The services that are managed under their own control, and I offer support and try and aim to keep things up to date. Been a bit of a challenge over COVID as services stop and start and reconfigure, but hopefully we will have a more settled state going forward. The site has this opportunity to find help and give help, and so those organisations on there can publish their needs, whether that be items for volunteers, for donations. And for example, when we ran the winter shelter, we had 30 people come through the website and volunteer to work on that through that. So it's a source of contacting people. So the other thing I always love to hear is publish good news stories. So if any of our partners have some stories and want to publish them, just send them through to me. You can find me at the Southampton at Street Support Net. So very brief update I'll hand on to Paul.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Paul. And over to the other Paul, who's going to speak and also do his Chris Whittier help a bit by moving the slides on. So over to Paul Woodman.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great for everyone to join us. And I've just been impressed by the collaboration work as we've listened already so far this evening. So thanks very much, everyone. I don't think we dreamt that we'd have this much strong collaboration working together when we first started back in January 2018. And we needed it, particularly last year when we were trying to find really complex solutions in the midst of the pandemic, when a lot of people were shielding, a lot of volunteers weren't able to come out and help. And one of those initiatives was around food. So I think Jason Murphy was on the call. We're having daily calls, if not hourly calls at some point, just trying to work out how to find food provision across the city. And so there were lots of different initiatives, and that was a great thing. It wasn't just churches, although I'm connected with church, but across the faith organizations and voluntary groups, we were trying to find solutions to food, particularly for people that were shielding, isolating, and in difficulty. And those included the rough sleepers who were in B&Bs, that they were given their breakfast, but they needed lunch and dinner. And between a whole host of volunteers, and it really was a city effort to do it, there was a sandwich factory created above Bar Church, where these people created hundreds and hundreds of sandwiches and evening meals and then distributed them across the different sites in the city every single day for a few months. And then there was an invoicing problem, but in terms of the local authorities, which kept me and Liz busy, but it was all funded by, some of it by the government, DCMS, some of it by gifts, and then some by the Martin Lewis Coronavirus Fund gave us a big chunk of money to be able to step into that situation. I think the abiding memory for me is the mountain of food at Above Bar Church, because they were shut for their services. The leader from the church was on the call earlier, but there it was, just absolutely rammed full of food ready to distribute out to the city. So it was a great testament to, I think, their generosity, but everyone else as well. So that's food. I'll come back to the winter support scheme later, but I'll hand over to Dan for Hope into Action.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, just a very quick update really on Hope into Action. We're a small project really, but we started in response to the first conference in January 2018. I think we recognised there was a gap, particularly around kind of move on housing and helping people really engage and build community, and so that they've got support for life as they move into independent living. When we had the last conference in September 2020, we'd literally opened our first house the day before and moved tenants in. Since that point, we've opened a second house, moved tenants into that. We've bought and renovated a third house with investors, and we're hopefully opening that one shortly. That's going to be part of the So Welcome project, bringing over a refugee family from a camp overseas. And we're in conversations with other churches coming on board as partners to help them engage in housing the homeless too. So we're actively looking for a fourth house with New Community Church, and in conversations about houses 5 and 6 with others as well. So a lot's happened since September, which is great to see. The tenants in those houses, they're building community, they're engaged in relationships with their neighbours, and they're beginning to take steps towards independent living. So whilst it's a small project, there's lots of exciting things going on, and hopefully we're playing our part in that big picture and helping people move on into independent living. Back to you, Paul, I think.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I've got a few slides here, but I won't linger on them. But 4th of January through to 1st of March, we concocted a plan just to turn this space, the Lighthouse Church, down by St Mary's Fire Station, into a place where people could stay. And we had to concoct a plan with public health that was going to be COVID friendly, as it were, or not COVID friendly, but COVID risk averse. And so what we did was build pods with an exterior window to the back of them that gave fresh air coming in, so everybody had their own space and there was no shared breathing space, so people could sleep in these pods overnight and have their own individual room, but they had fresh air coming in. And so working really hard with public health, and we can't say enough to thank them for their support. We create this plan, it was to the wire because we were making these pods through the Christmas holidays, and then Hampshire Fire and Rescue kindly came and helped us with the fire risk assessment. So the insurer was happy for us to be able to house people, and we created 8 pods. And through the coldest months, you remember how cold it was in January and February this year, we had 281 overnight stays. So people slept in them for 281 nights altogether. And it really was bitterly cold on some of the nights when they were coming in. And we had 60 volunteers that supported this, and they were well used. You can see that it peaked around this time, week 6, week 7, which, if you remember, was when it was bitterly cold overnight and you wouldn't want to stay in there. And what people said was they liked having somewhere safe, warm, quiet and friendly. They liked the private room, and most of them came through every night for 2 months. So we were their bed and breakfast for 2 months. And most of them have moved on into a part of that cohort statistics that Liz pointed out earlier, where they've moved on to better accommodation. So we also had a limited pool of volunteers we could draw from because some people couldn't volunteer for health reasons. We put an age limit on, which was advised to us. And so 60 people managed to provide these 281 stays. Many people putting in triple shifts and coming back 2 or 3 nights a week to do overnight shifts. It was an incredible effort. So again, we couldn't have done it without that volunteer base and without the backup of, you know, the support from voluntary services, from street support to make the project happen. And then it was the quickest project I think we've ever pulled together in terms of trying to set it up. Once we got the permission from the insurers, but overall you see there's statistics around the volunteer experience was overall very good. You know, most of them experiencing a great time, and 4 out of 5 of them said that they would volunteer with us again. So I don't think we'd want to do it like that every year, but there was something nice about having an individual room and some privacy. So I think there's things for us to learn and to chew over for future winters and see if we can do things a different way. So that's it from me. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Paul, and Dan as well. It's fantastic to hear the work that's gone on, and as you say, it provides us a basis for thinking about what we might need to put in place for next winter, although hopefully not with the challenges of COVID-19 on top of them. Maybe we'll keep our fingers crossed that that's at least put to bed to some degree. So we're going to move swiftly on now to Rebecca from Go Southampton, who's going to talk about the Change the Way You Give campaign, which has been long in gestation, held up because of COVID, but fingers crossed about to go live. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Jo. Next slide, Paul, if you can. Yeah, I'm really pleased to say that we have a live date today, which is really great. So we've the Change the Way You Give campaign is a diverted giving scheme and gives visitors and residents, workers an opportunity to give differently and to support local projects that give direct support to rough sleepers and people kind of at risk of homelessness across the city. And it's given us an opportunity to create a platform and to provide that dedicated support to those local initiatives. So I'm pleased to say I've personally delivered the contactless donation points across the city today. So we've got 5 donation points across the city, including West Quay, the Marlins, Sea City and Central Library, where you're able to donate with your debit or credit card. And as I said, that money gets collated and shared to support local causes, which I'll cover shortly. We're encouraging kind of givers to donate £3 as a standard donation, but anybody that wants to either reduce that or increase that donation can do so on the terminals. We've also launched today a GoFundMe page, which you can find at changesouthampton.co.uk, where you can also directly support those local initiatives. Thank you. So yeah, so the Change the Way You Give campaign initially will fund 3 projects. These projects were selected by a panel of the Street Support Action Group Southampton network. Plus, we also included individuals with lived experience of rough sleeping in Southampton. So the first 3 projects that this campaign will help support is working with 2 saints. This donations will support the creation of welcome bags for new arrivals who are entering accommodation, rough sleep accommodation across the city. This will provide them with the essentials such as toiletries, a change of clothes, and make sure that they can settle successfully into their new accommodation. We're also going to be working with the Society of St James, where we'll be funding furniture for individuals moving into more established accommodation to try and make sure that it feels homely for those that are moving into this accommodation, and that hopefully will help them feel more settled as they go through the different accommodation types. And then finally, we're working with No Limits to support young people who don't necessarily have fixed accommodation by upgrading their shower facilities at their advice centre in the High Street in Southampton. So they're the three initial projects, but later this year, this campaign will also support the future winter night shelters, hopefully in a non-COVID required format. And ultimately, what I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention is that obviously these are the first projects that have been selected, but we're always open to hearing other ideas for future projects, as long as it kind of supports our collective vision that Southampton hopefully will be a city where no one needs to sleep rough or beg. And I'd encourage people to contact us on the email address if they've got any suggestions, but also if you use the QR code today, you can find the donation link live today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rebecca. It's so good to see that eventually launched now that we can all be out and about a little bit more. And we really appreciate people promoting that as a different way of giving and a more structured way of giving, if you like, to support some of the practical projects and initiatives that we've heard of over this session. So I'm really pleased to move on and back on time as well. Thanks, Paul, for reining yours bit back in, and to welcome Mary Darcy, who's the lead for homelessness and housing services in the city and is one of the executive directors at the City Council. So Mary, some concluding comments from you.
Thank you very much, Jo, and I won't take up all of the 10 minutes, I can assure you, that is left over. So I just wanted to, first of all, as you did earlier, Jo, welcome some of our new colleagues to the session today. So we are, as you said, joined by Councillor Vassilou, who is our new cabinet member within the council. So just want to extend that welcome to people who are returning colleagues to the Street Support Action Group in Southampton. I have to say it's a real privilege to be asked to join today and to speak a few words at the end here, because the words of beyond bricks and mortar, I think, are ones that chime with all of us. And that issue of being human as opposed to a statistic, which was very much shown in that opening video that we had from our Southampton University students. And sometimes we do think about numbers, don't we? We think about what's the number that we've reported back to government? What was the count last year? And actually each one of those numbers represents someone's life. And what Liz showed us in the numbers that she demonstrated is that over the last year, we have impacted on so many people's lives, and everybody who is here virtually today has been part of that process of impacting and helping people to change their lives. So I think from the outset, that beyond bricks and mortar, it's a really, really important thing for us to hold on to. And I really want to thank all of the panelists, because you've really made us think about that, the person at the centre of all of this. And You've inspired me personally to think, as we've been talking about this issue of complexity. So starting with Nick and moving through all of the presentations this evening, the issue that complexity is something that we need to absolutely accept here. We can't get rid of the complexity. It is a complex issue, and people are complex. Human beings are complex. And I think it's really important to think about accepting complexity. And if we accept complexity, then we think about building relationships. And we talked about the work that's being done under the Rough Sleeper Initiative is all about building relationships. It's about reaching out to people and about finding out what those people need in the place that they live their lives. And we can only do that if we work collaboratively. And I think that's been the word of today, hasn't it? Collaboration. It has been so important. And in a former life, I had a mentor who talked about systems leadership. And the phrase that they used, and there may be a couple of people on this call who have heard me say this phrase, is say yes to the mess, which is a really nice way of recognising the mess of the systems and the people and the lives that we all live. They're not neat. They don't have simple answers to complex, difficult situations. And Nick reminded us that of the complex interplay between people's lives, both their past, their present, the environment in which they live, their psychological and their physical needs. They all come together, and for each and every one of us, they come together differently. And I think what we've heard today, and what's been the hallmark of this Street Support Action Group, is an ability to have a variety of responses. It is ability to not have one simplistic approach to the needs of the people in Southampton. That's why there's so many people on this call, and that's why we've been managed to support so many people during what has been, you know, probably at one level the worst year of many people's lives in terms of the pandemic, and how we have been able to respond. So I really do want to thank everybody who has spoken today and have left me certainly with many things to think about. And I think the Street Support Network demonstrates that Southampton as a system is able to accept, embrace and work with complexity, and that collaboration and generosity is at the heart of what you do. I mean, thinking about what Paul talked about in terms of the volunteering hours that went into supporting the project that so rapidly got put together over the Christmas period. You can't do that without generous people wanting to invest their time into a city that seeks out and reaches people and connects with what they want to do in terms of giving and being generous to the city. So that's been, it's been a privilege to listen to everybody today. And in terms of generosity, I want to reach out and say to one of the most generous-hearted people I've met since joining Southampton last year, a big thank you to Joe Ash. This will be Joe's last Street Support Action Group conference as Chair and Chief Exec of SBS, but I have a sneaking suspicion, Joe, you will be joining us in the future in a different capacity. But on behalf of all of the people on the call today, and behalf of everyone in the Street Support Action Group, we want to thank you for your generosity, because you have given, and even though I've only been part of the city for the last year and a bit, you've given to me very much personally. You've supported me and been there when I've needed advice and guidance, but I know that you've also been there to so many organisations, to so many individuals, and you've certainly been a real guiding hand behind the work of the Street Support Action Group and so many other areas of support within the city. So whilst we can't all give you a hug or a big round of applause as we would if we were in a big space, I think it would be good if we could all just clap. And Jason said big loud applause for Joe. So Joe, I feel very privileged to be able to say thank you, and I'm going to finish there.
Well, thank you very much. I feel a bit overwhelmed, to be honest. It's not going to be my last conference because I shall be joining you. I have a personal and passionate interest in homelessness and have done ever since I was part of the organised squatting movement when I was a student. So I've directly experienced homelessness, and I don't intend to stop talking about it once I've retired. But thank you. That's really kind of you. And I don't really need to say very much more, Mary. You've summarised the event very ably, as always you do. And it really just suffices for me as chair to give a formal thanks to all of our speakers today, to the members of the steering group who've done the arrangements behind the scenes and handled the setting up the Zoom and doing the PowerPoints, etc., etc. I'm sorry it hasn't been a very interactive event for the audience. That's the nature of trying to deal with lots of people in a short time frame over this sort of technology. But hopefully next time we meet as a conference, we might actually be able to go back to either Solent University or the church and meet again in human form, because that's always much nicer, isn't it, and much more interactive. But meanwhile, I hope that we've updated everybody on the work going on in the city, that people feel that they can play a part through their pledges, through their contribution to the alternative giving scheme, through promoting the work that agencies and groups are doing. And together we will continue to collaborate, and we will make Southampton a city where it isn't necessary for anybody to sleep rough or beg. And if we can do that, we'll have done a great deal. So with that, I wish everybody to be safe and to be positive. We're going out on a final film, I believe. Paul, is that right? Yes. And then Rebecca will cut us off all together collectively. So when the film finishes, you can all go and have your cup of tea or whatever it is you're doing in your normal home. And I will see some of you around, if not in the park on the 2nd of July, about 1 o'clock, weather permitting. Otherwise, I'll see people anyway. Take care for now. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.